when we talk about Ewa Pile, but what are we talking about when we say Ewa Pile? We talk about internal and external harmony and balance. If we were using Omanela and the Igbo Tao, we talk about internal and external harmony and balance. That's what you're trying to restore. That's what your philosophy should help you bring about, both in your character and the family character, then the community character. That's what you're trying to do. And that means to seek harmony with nature and cosmology as well as humans and in your ecology. That's what the African thing is about. It's not about no crazy people. You know, we've got medical books written in ancient Kemet where they're doing brain surgery, we're doing obstetrics, where they're doing other kind, abdominal medicine, books written back then by black folks. So we're not new to science and technology. When we left Africa to come to the Western Hemisphere as enslaved, captured people, because we never agreed to slavery. We weren't a part of making any laws that said if you captured me, I'm a slave.
Right.
So I was never a slave. My ancestors was never a slave. That's in the mind of some other crook who stole me, who captured me, who stole my labor, who stole my wealth. I did not make any law that tell him if he captured me, I'm a slave. So why are we going to let him set the narrative that defined who we were? Because that's not who we were. We were Africans who had been falsely set upon. What happened to us was what they call human trafficking today. This was a criminal offense then. Under universal principles and law, it is a criminal offense now. But we're letting somebody rewrite history by claiming he could make a law that can govern me, and I had nothing to do with making the law. That's not the way the world works. At least not the African world. And so if you go back to the African ancient books, you will find every story in the Bible. And then you will find further along in that same story, using some of the same characters at a different time in history, you'll find the Cain and Abel story where the envious, jealous brother Cain would kill out of envy his brother Abel. So you will find that same story in the ancient African literature thousands of years earlier, where the brother Set would kill his brother Osiris out of envy and jealousy. And there was never anybody named Set or anybody named Osiris, just like there was never anybody named Cain or never anybody named Abel. It is a story about envy and jealousy at any time in the consciousness of humanity demonstrating itself and manifesting itself, right? And so those are just a few of the things. You can go further and you can see stories like the Immaculate Conception. You know, matter of fact, the Ethiopian New Year, which is celebrated on the 11th of September, is all about the Immaculate Conception. But nobody really, even many Ethiopians no longer know what their holiday is really about. Okay? And the holiday is about the day when this woman resurrects her husband, which is the Lazarus story or the Jesus Easter story, and is animated by the real thing, the energy, the divinity. When this body, when this group of elements have spent itself, depleted itself, and broken down, what happens to the energy that is you? My grandmother was dying, and I went home. And my grandmother raised all of us. Even though my mother and father was in the house, my mother and father were more like brothers and sisters. My grandmother and grandfather, they were the bosses. And then I had my great-grandmother there, and she was even more of a boss. And so when Mama was dying, and Mama was a traditionalist, we call her root woman down in South Carolina. And so my mother called and said, if you want to see her, you need to come home quickly. So I jumped on a plane and I flew to South Carolina. And I got to her bedside. And she asked everybody to leave the room. So I said, oh Lord, what's going on now? And she told me, she said, James, she used to call me James. Because in a certain African language, you can't, the word J don't exist, so you don't pronounce it. So her J was a G. And she said, James, I want to go home. I said, well, Ma, you don't have to stay here. I thought she wanted to go back home to the house, you know. I said, I'll tell him now to take you home. You could die there. She said, oh, no, I don't want to go back there. She said, I want to go home. And then I got a little scared right about there, like a monster. She said, come take me up out of here. She told me to come and take that spirit out of my body and let her go. I was so scared, I did not know. I just was short of wetting my pants when I remember put my two arms under her arms, pull her chest up, I slid her back up on the pillow. And she took a deep breath. And she was calm. She said, you could tell the others to come in now. And I did. And the next day I flew back to New York. And I called that morning my sister, oh, after you left last night, Mama was sitting up there eating grits and catfish. And she was just having a good time talking about Pete and all of them. And while she's talking to me, Mama passed. We give that, sometimes we call it the ghost. That energy finds another being to reside in until it gets this new body. Or it could reside in your ecology because it's energy. You go back and merge with the greater force of energy in the total universe. But if you don't complete your journey because you're now here fooling around with all the negative and sliding and dying, then you got to come back and repeat the process over and over until your time is done. The whites took from that the concept called purgatory. If you study your history, it'll make the rest of the world so simple. It's just make it all so simple. You know? You ever been in love? Girls, yeah, in the African sense, love is not loving your body or loving your looks or loving your personality. Africans love the God in them, which they have spent their whole life cultivating, meaning those Africans who are in our senses, because we're out of our senses both at home and here, thanks to colonialism and slavery, but we're coming back. It is the God in me that seeks the God in you because I know the God in me and thus I can recognize the God in you. That's what love is about. They make us think love is about the shape of your hips, the contours of your face, the color of your clothing, the type of hairstyle, the smoothness of a personality presentation. Most people who present their personality is putting the best foot forward. And it's almost always false, you know. And all of us have been there. I thought I was in love so many times. So Lord have mercy. I know my passion and my love can give you the capacity to mate at that level and create. Every human being you know was created by human beings. So let's stop going to somebody's fake out. You want to look and treat God like God is God, look in the mirror. There's nothing you know about God that didn't come from the mind of a man and a woman. Nothing. It's scary because it's so much more comfortable to give it away to some external esoteric essence that don't have to take responsibility for anything. Somebody defeated us militarily and then decide to tell us who we are and who we are not. And to the degree we don't know who we were, we buy into the who we are not. And everybody takes a piece of our story and make it their story. Fragments from the periphery of the African spiritual and cultural system became Christianity. And when the Protestant broke away in the 1500s, the Ethiopian church was already 1,000+ years old. Had nothing to do with Protestant Europeanism. When the Catholic Church was founded in the 10th century, the Ethiopian church was already 500 years old. Has nothing to do with that. Though some people try to make it appear that we borrowed it from them in that form, no. If you look at how we look at the arrangements and our referencing the divine and our relationship to divinity, and the elemental understanding of how to build human character so that it imitates divinity, you'll get a good sense of what African culture is really about. lot of us practice the Yoruba culture, some of us the Igbo culture and others, but none of them have any think over the other. Each of them are groups of African under certain circumstances at a certain time in history trying to work this thing out. You know, the Yoruba have done an extraordinary job. The Igbo did an extraordinary job before they were attacked, defeated by the British. You know, if you look at the Igbo, for instance, who didn't have the kind of the royal kingship that the Yoruba had, the Igbos their power resided in the sacred groves. When the whites figured that out, they just burnt the whole damn forest down in order to destroy the sacred groves of the Igbo people. And so that dismantled and disorganized the people because they had violated the sanctity of what these people believed and thought they knew. With the Yoruba, they tried to capture the king and capture the power. A lot of us practice the Yoruba culture, some of us the Igbo culture and others, but none of them have any think over the other. Each of them are groups of African under certain circumstances at a certain time in history trying to work this thing out. You know, the Yoruba have done an extraordinary job. The Igbo did an extraordinary job before they were attacked, defeated by the British. You know, if you look at the Igbo, for instance, who didn't have the kind of the royal kingship that the Yoruba had, the Igbos their power resided in the sacred groves. When the whites figured that out, they just burnt the whole damn forest down in order to destroy the sacred groves of the Igbo people. And so that dismantled and disorganized the people because they had violated the sanctity of what these people believed and thought they knew. With the Yoruba, they tried to capture the king and capture the palace. And stuff like that. Even thought they knew. With the Yoruba, they tried to capture the king and capture the palace. And stuff like that. But these people were not doing it for any religious reason. They were doing it for basic human greed, envy, and jealousy. When they came into Africa, if you read some of the documents they sent back to Europe, telling them what they had found, cities that was laid out in grids. They drew pictures of some of these cities. If I showed you slides, it'd blow your mind. They talked about the walls that people had built, the beautiful palaces. And then 2 centuries later, they're betraying us, the barbarians hanging from trees. You know? And it gets crazy. And because we don't know our history, we get to thinking that's the way the deal was. What the African says is that all things are expressions of aspects of the divine essence having your peculiar experience. So when we talk about voodoo, there was no religion called voodoo when we left Africa. That's a new thing. Let's get that straight. And so when we think of this voodoo, you got to be careful to learn how to rephrase and recast the system of worship that we engage in. And say, let's just take Haiti. Involves elements, loa. Those elements is a reference to the forces of nature and cosmology as interpreted and understood by our ancestors through experiences. So when we see the drawings that they call bebes, that is some ancestor, some of our great minds' interpretation of a cosmic energy formation that responds to a certain vibration, be it language, music, or some other rhythm form. And so we paint what we perceive to be the representative instrument of that elemental energy vibration. You understand? We have something we call orishas. And they actually, people think that orishas are persons. But orishas are not persons. We use anthropomorphism to symbolize concepts, ideas, and principles. Orishas are concepts, ideas, and principles that represent forces and powers in both nature, in the human, and in the cosmology. To the degree to our ancestors understand how to define them and isolate them, and to understand their function and how to have a relationship to them, that is the degree to which we create a theology around and about them. That's African sacred science. But most people would not even deal with our sacred science as sacred science. And we don't study enough to defend the integrity of our institutions. There's nothing that even borders on our ancestors' sacred science and an understanding of how this world works. No institution, none of them. They're all primitive compared to the depth at which we understood.
Everything that is written, carved on the Shabaka stone is what we teach in our science classes today. What is important is how encompassing this story is on the Shabaka stone. And as we move through this process, we look at the second philosophy, which is the essences of pre-existing order and arrangement, where the Shabaka stone and our ancestors spoke about the early formers of all of the molecules and all of the atoms coming into existence. The Nun, Nunet, the Ha, the Hahet, the Kak, Kaket, and the Amun and Amunet. In other words, they talked about the Nun being matter, the Nunet being space, the Ha being infinity, and the Hahet is finity. The Kak is the darkness, Kaket is the light. The Amen is the hidden, and the Amenet is the revealed. The male and the female entities. What's important is that our ancestors understood you cannot have a male without a female. So there was never a conception of a male-only God. And as we travel throughout Africa and look at the many, many thousands of nations that reside in Africa, the common theme is that all things come into being by the coming together of the male and the female. And it brings forward life. And the third philosophy dealt with the essences of order and arrangement. Shu and Tefnut. Shu is the male and it is air. Tefnut is female and moisture. Air and moisture. This is science. And it's very important that we don't get in so deep inside of a theology or a religion that we don't see the sacred science behind this story. Shu and Tefnut give birth to Nut and to Geb. Nut is female. Nut is the sky. Geb is male and Geb is the earth. So their perception of life did not come from a mother earth. It came from a father earth and a mother sky, because that is where light and heat energy comes from, that comes down to our planet and creates the organic life. And then Nut and Geb give birth to Asar, Aset, Nebetet, Seton. Asar is the original father. Aset is determination and the original mother. Nebetet is the oracle reader, the one that can see things that others cannot see. And Seton are the forces that destroy. Seton, where we get the word Satan from, is not a bad thing. It's just what exists as a destroyer. And we know in life that sometimes in order to construct, you must destruct. So there is a time for the destroyer, but the destroyer must come at a time when he is needed. Now Asar and Aset give birth to Heru, who is the resurrection and the light. So the Shabaka stone takes us through a dynamic process of coming into being that is called Kepra, represented by the dung beetle. And the dung beetle represents this process of coming. And this story then leads to an understanding of the science of what we're talking about. The Sphinx was the face of a black woman. The Sphinx is not a man. It's the face of a woman and the body of a lioness, because they believe that the year that it was born, created 10,000 years ago, before the pyramids. In fact, the pyramids were built there to complement the Sphinx that had been there for generations, if not millennia. It was built during the cusp of the constellations of Leo and Virgo. So Virgo was the woman's head, and Leo was the body of the lion or the lioness. And so we know that the pyramids were astronomically inclined. We know that one of the functions was to trace the constellations. We know that the 3 pyramids that exist right now actually are in direct relationship to the 3 stars in Orion's belt. They perfectly match up. So we know that it was done for astronomical reasons. We know that every entrance to those 3 pyramids, Khufu, Khafra, Menkaure, father, son, grandson, are all on the north side of the pyramid. And when you go into the gallery that look up, if you had a telescope, all 3 of those northern entrances aimed directly at the North Star, which became the way in which they could track the constellations in the heavens. Now, Count Volta is going to study science, which tells us that we have a great amount of information that says that the Kemites had the ability to create electricity, and that in fact the ankh that you see in the hands of many of the pictographs of many of the netchers actually was a lamp. Now, what is the evidence of this? It's written, African Origins of Electromagnetism, Nur Anka Men, goes through a wonderful exploration of the science of our ancestors. We understand this and we know this. So with this information, when you look at what Volta is going to come back, and what does he get credit for? He gets credit for creating the battery. And the battery was the Jed column that the ankh was put on that recharged the light in the ankh. The Jed column was the actual recharger for the ankh itself as light. He comes back and gets credit for inventing the battery. When we look at myth and ritual, ritual also being ceremony, what we're actually looking at is a story. It is paying homage to all things that came before you. It is like saying that when you perform in life and you don't call upon the ancestors, it's like you're acting alone. So you call upon these forces to be with you and to guide you. And most of these forces actually represent aspects of nature. In Kemet, they would be called Neteru. The community, as generations go on, create a ceremony, a ritual, either reenacting what that hero or shero did, or it will be reenacting exactly what may have spurred the event on. And so myth allows us to reenact the event through the story, so that when you're looking at the cosmology story, what our ancestors are looking at is that they're looking at the earth. And what they notice is that there are creations that come in the form of a seed, and that the seed placed in the earth, the womb of Gaia, the womb of the living earth, now is going to bring forward plants. Plants are going to go through a growth process. As they go through a growth process, they're going to age. As they age, they are then going to die. When they die, they are going to decay. But after they decay, they're going to resurrect themselves in spring to another life form. So the very first forms of resurrection came from agricultural science, when humans were able to scientifically model life as it related to the world around them. Then these humans, as they started to think, began to look at themselves. And they began to say, but in our science, we also come from a seed. And in this seed, we are then born. And then as we are born, we grow. As we grow, we age. As we age, we die. When we die, our body decays, and then we resurrect ourselves. And that gave birth to the Asarian drama. We are now existing in the cusp. We are moving out of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. Just as it was 2,100 odd years ago, we were moving on the cusp out of Aries, the ram, the family of sheep. The ram is the male sheep. The EWE, is the female sheep. But what's the baby sheep called? It's called a lamb. So the Lamb of God, who will take away the sins of the world, is going to be ushered out of Aries into Pisces, who is going to be the what? The fisher of humans. And he, the Piscean, the fish, is going to lead to the age of Aquarius. When you search for truth, righteousness, and justice, when you look at the laws of the cosmic universe, you come to understand that everything is in balance. Everything comes into existence as it relates to the coming together of two concepts that some people would call in opposition, some people would call complementary. We all understand that each and every one of us is half man and half woman. And out of this, our ancestors paid homage to this. You have Aset, who is known to be the mother of the human family, the wife of the male creator, Asar. Other entities like Ma'at, it was she, the righteous path, that brought things into existence with order and arrangement. And it was her husband, Tehuti, the ibis bird, that would be the wisdom and knowledge. So the way in which our ancestors put it through scientific means and through spiritual means is that in order to be on the right path, you have to have the wisdom to be on the path. But in order to have wisdom, you must be on the path. So in a sense, these are complements to each other. They are husband and wife. And when men do what they're supposed to do, women can do what they're supposed to do. But there are responsibilities as men and women that we have. And women have awesome responsibility. And it is not until the righteousness and the balance and the harmony comes back in the cosmos and on the earth, the relationships between men and women become balanced again. Not to put her on a pedestal, not to put her in front of us or behind us, under us. She belongs beside us. Her role is very important as it relates to bringing the world back to where it should be. And when you go back to African traditional societies, you can see that balance. You can see the respect and the honor that women are given. You also recognize the difference between men and women. There is a difference. But that difference does not mean better or worse, superior or inferior. There is just a difference because in order for life to continue, there has to be a difference between the genders, because when we are in unity, we are actually the original creator God of all. And out of that, we create other little gods who are our children.